I've already made a graphic using Illustrator, but I want to point out a few things in case you want to make your own graphic. I used a reference from maxpixel.net to make this graphic. I made thick parts of the frame using the standard tools. Since the frame is made out of curves, I needed to expand the appearance, so I'm actually exporting the strokes. Otherwise, I would just see very thin curves in Blender. This option, or something similar to it, is available in any vector program. Since this needs to be transparent, I made sure I used a transparent background when exporting the graphic. I then exported the frame as an SVG. In Blender, I'll be using the Import SVG add-on. In Top View, I import the SVG file. I select each of the curves that were imported, right-click, and convert the curves to a mesh. After the curves are converted to meshes, I select everything and use Ctrl-J to join the meshes. I right-click and set the origin to the center of the mass. I can then use Shift-S and choose Selection to Cursor to center the frame. I then rotate the frame around the x-axis 90 degrees. Using Ctrl-A, I apply the scale and rotation of the frame. I then add a solidify modifier to give the frame some thickness. I then apply the modifier. I right-click and choose Shade Smooth to smooth out the rough look of the frame. Under the Object Data Properties tab, under the Normals panel, I turn on Auto Smooth to correct any shading issues. In Edit mode, I select the frame, and under the Mesh menu, I go to the Cleanup menu and choose Limited Dissolve. This will simplify the geometry. Now that I have the frame completed, it's time to add a simple material. I'll be making a concrete material since this is a rosette window, which is common to the outer walls of churches. I split the viewport and open the shader editor. I also go into the material preview mode so I can see the material. Under the Material Properties tab, I delete any material already applied to the object. Add a new material to the frame. I then change the base color to a gray. I'm using the hex code B5, B4, B1. I then add a Musgrave texture and connect it to the principled shader. I can then change the options on the Musgrave texture to get a look that I like. Using the Node Wrangler add-on, I select the Musgrave texture and use Ctrl-T to add a mapping and texture coordinate node. and then select the object in the texture coordinate node. I add a Voronoi texture node and connect the mapping node to the Voronoi texture. Add a mix RGB and connect both texture nodes. I can then change the scale of the Voronoi texture. I add a color ramp between the mix RGB and the principled shader, moving the white color stop to get my desired look. I changed the white color stop to a gray. I'm using the hex code B5, B4, B1. I can then change the factor on the mix RGB to get the right look. I add a bump node, connecting the mix RGB to the height input. I then connect the bump node to the normal of the principled shader. I then change the strength of the bump node to get my desired look. For the stained glass, I add a cylinder and rotate it around the x-axis 90 degrees. I then scale it down so it fits within the frame. I apply the scale and rotation to the glass object. I add a Boolean modifier to the glass object. Using the frame as the object. If you have holes left behind like I do, open the Solver Options panel and activate Self-Intersection. I then apply the modifier. If I hide the frame and select the glass, in Edit mode, I can now see that each of the intersections of the glass are now individual objects. I select the glass, and under the Mesh menu, I go to Cleanup menu and choose Limited Dissolve. To make the stained glass look old, I'll be using a wavy glass technique for the base material. I add a subdivision surface modifier using the simple option. I apply the modifier and add a new material. Under the Material Properties tab, in the Settings panel, I change the blend mode to alpha hash and activate screen space refraction. In the Render Properties tab, I activate screen space reflections and refraction. I delete the principled shader and add a glass shader. I add a hue saturation value node and connect it to the glass shader. I can now change the color of the glass. To add some wavy glass texture, I add a Musgrave texture node and a displacement node. Connecting them to the displacement input of the output node. I can then change the options on both nodes to get the look I like. I can copy these nodes to a new material and change the color. In edit mode, I can select the faces where I want to apply this new material. I then select the material in the Materials Property tab and assign the new material. If I want a piece of glass to not have a specific color, I can change the hue saturation color to white.